Hello and welcome to Ikima Council's Makala podcast channel. Makala, meaning branches, Kasisuthu. My name is Amanda Masondo and I'm your host. We hope this podcast finds a way to impact, educate, and inspire your next. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Buzzsprout. Basically everywhere where you find your podcast fix. Every first and last Friday of every month. My guest today is Karabo. He is the CEO of 2020 Insight. Take a listen. With the current headwinds that are affecting South Africa's economy at the moment, obviously global inflation, interest rate hikes, unrest, pandemic, how would you describe the state of entrepreneurship at the moment?
It's a lot of money is spent on developing small businesses and entrepreneurs in the country. Through BEE, corporate companies have to spend 3% of their net profit after tax. Government also spends quite a bit of money in it. And for me, the ultimate parameter as to whether we're being effective or not is the jobs figures and the economic growth. And for as long as those are either stagnant or going in reverse, it says we still haven't figured out how to solve the problem. And and that's essentially it. Until we start seeing unemployment below 20%, 15%, and so we start seeing economic growth, GDP growing at about 5 to 10%. We clearly have not figured out how to grow the economy through entrepreneurship, which is really the only vehicle that they can drive it.
And do you think, based on that, the current status quo of us believing that entrepreneurs are a gateway in trying to solve the economic crisis of a country, do we think we're doing enough to lend them support, whatever else that they may need? Are we doing enough to get them there?
Look, there's a lot of help that is available. I think what tends to be the drawback is just the availability of information and people understanding where and what help is available. But our whole I think we've got a mixed sort of bag of things. When you look at the social grant system and all of those always increasing and stuff, we must understand that creates a certain it encourages a certain type of mindset that relies on government to provide for your needs, right? Which runs counter to entrepreneurship, which ultimately it is really just solving problems and profiting by solving problems. And if you build a culture in a country for people to look to government to solve all our problems, then you cannot at the same time drive entrepreneurship. You create a culture that runs totally in opposite direction to that. And I think that's where we get it wrong a lot of times, which is self-defeating, that the entire culture and the ethos and how we see ourselves as a country is not entrepreneurial. It's not about solving problems. It's about looking to other people to solve our problems. Yeah.
So if we consider the period in which we do away with grants, for instance, and what is the alternative?
Well, you don't necessarily have to do away with them. I believe there are people, as a society, we've got a responsibility to people who cannot care for themselves, right? Children, the aged, people who have disabilities that make them unable to care. We've got that. But for people who can care for themselves, who may not have the opportunity, our responsibility as a society is to create that opportunity, right? And even if you're going to give them a grant, with a country that has so many needs and so many things that are not working, the very least you could do is to say, okay, here's a social grant, but then this is what the society expects from you. This is the little bit that we need you to contribute, and And if we did that, then I think we start moving in the right direction. But a situation now where you don't have a job, so here's 350. You don't have this, so here's that, and here's that, and then the cries are no, 350 is not enough. Make it 600. Make it whatever. It's like, where do you stop? And I think the problem is just the philosophy behind it, not even the amounts of just sitting at home and getting money or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the issue of SMMEs not making it. Stats SA recently released that over 500 businesses have been liquidated this year alone. Load shedding has been a major impact on the closures of those businesses. But what else is driving the businesses closing down? What other factors are influencing this 5-year mark where entrepreneurs are not making it post that?
I mean, it's a natural thing, right? To run a business requires competency in so many different fields, right? You need the ability to spot opportunities. You need to be able to build and maintain very good relationships. You need to be a leader, to lead your employees and etc. You need to be able to manage your finances. You need to be managed. So there's so many different things that as an entrepreneur you need to be able to do that naturally and then you need to be lucky also, just to be in the right place at the right time. So the number of factors that are working against you are such that it should be expected that a small business is not going to succeed under any circumstance, right? But then the current situation then just keeps we just adding a bit more to those factors that work against you and expecting a whole lot more than from our entrepreneurs. But then you have an environment where because of the challenges also with our education, with a high unemployment rate, a lot of people start businesses not because they've got a passion for providing a particular service or running a business, but purely because there's no other option. You can't find a job, right? So let me just do something. And then again that just builds, because to survive as a small business then you need to have that to be able to stay with it through the challenges that come and all those things and those lonely sort of nights when you just don't have the answers. But if it's not driven by passion, if it is opportunistic purely because and or expedient, then you're not going to have that part of you, the resolve that you require to survive when things don't go well. And so naturally I think you're just going to have a higher failure rate. We don't have a very good education, I think, system in terms of the output of what it gives people, the training, the skills that people get coming out of it. And so again, naturally, then you have people that have all these factors, additional factors working against them, trying to start businesses and run them. And naturally, you're going to have a much higher failure rate than maybe other countries where the support systems and the ecosystems are more supportive.
And then when are we ready to have conversations about if the economic structure or the failures of the economy at the moment, or even for a while, for decades actually, even if we consider that, are we ready to have conversations about not everyone is an entrepreneur? But if we do start having those conversations, what options are we giving people? So if I can't I can't find a job, I'm educated, but I can't secure a job, but I'm also not necessarily entrepreneurially inclined. What options are there?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got to differentiate between people that want to start businesses and take over the world, and people that just want to provide a service and run their own corner shop and stuff. So entrepreneurs are not, they're not born, they are built, and there are qualities that help you to become successful as an entrepreneur, and you can build those in yourself in time. So it isn't a situation that there's certain type of people who have a genetic makeup that makes them entrepreneurial and others who don't. You might have qualities that make it easier for you, if you need to be building relationships and stuff. Maybe having an extroverted sort of personality will help. But in some businesses, I remember there was the book that was written a long time ago, well, not very long, but I think it was Good to Great and that sort of stuff, right? And they said the CEOs of the the larger and more large, generally they tend to be introverted people that just work behind the scenes, and so there aren't any. It's just the ability to focus and to stay with things and becomes important. But all the qualities can be nurtured in any individual. So I don't think that we have that where we can say that not everybody is an entrepreneur. Maybe not, but everybody can become an entrepreneur and a successful one at that. Yeah.
We were speaking offline about the current situation at the moment and what the kind of conversations you're now having to have with some of your clients and some of the businesses that you interact with. What would you say? What are you telling them at the moment? I know that it's obviously a tricky time. They're trying to survive unrest. They're trying to survive load shedding. They're trying to survive numerous headwinds. But what are conversations that you are having? What kind of support are you giving to these SMMEs to sort of weather the storm?
Yeah. You know, when people are in a desperate situation, it's very difficult to have philosophical discussions. You know, uh, it's really so a lot of our time and energies are spent more on just helping companies to just make it through the current sort of crises that they're facing, and not necessarily talking about grand visions and that sort of stuff, and just to keep the status quo and not drop even lower. We're having to spend quite a bit of time just on that, you know, and coming up with those solutions with corporates and etc. So it's it's a very but it is every, as they say, every crisis is an opportunity, and it is probably the time to really be thinking about these challenges that we have. um, how do we use them to turn things around for ourselves, because they force us to face certain realities. um, Maybe we talk the employment equity bill, right? um, you think to yourself, there's about 55 million black people in the country, uh, about 7 or 8 million white people. We're 30 years into it,
Yeah.
and we're still complaining about black people not being in the not being underrepresented in management in the country. And the truth is that economic power is in the hands of black people in this country, right? Because economic power rests with the people with customers.
The buyer.
Yeah. And black households, I don't know the numbers now, but I used to look at them about 2 or 3 years ago, spend about R1 trillion on the economy every year, compared to white households, which just spend, I think, about 350 billion or so. So uh, what is missing is just the ability to organize ourselves, uh, in order that the power that you have, you can use it to your benefit. And so, ultimately, that is we shouldn't be needing an employment equity bill. If anything, we should be having a bill that protects the minorities in the country, and not a bill that protects the majority. And just our inability as blacks to, they say there's strength in numbers. We seem to have a weakness in numbers, and that's really just an inability to come together to organize ourselves in a way that we can use the power that we have to our benefit.
That makes sense. Um, so small businesses now are trying to think of ways to sort of navigate for themselves or ask government to assist them with things that they specifically need. Some have actually asked government to consider implementing subsidies on diesel powered generators or other alternative energy to help them cope with load shedding and that kind of thing. Is this something that government is looking into, should be looking into, and is it something that South Africa is ready to implement with the current load shedding that nobody seems to know the end date?
Yeah. A government is a cooperative amongst the people. Just, you can set up a cooperative and say, for a specific industry that you are service providers in restaurants, and so you're going to create this body that's going to represent your common needs in engaging with government, in engaging with your suppliers, etc. Um, and then you contribute money towards it to meet your common needs, But so that's what we have in government, and we pay taxes towards that for it to handle specific things. But if we're going to look to government to give us everything, then it's not going to work, right? Because where we sit now is that the proportion of the tax base is getting narrower and narrower as the unemployment rate increases, and the tax burden on that narrowing tax base is increasing.
Yeah.
And so each and every additional ask that we put to government means a higher tax rate, either in the currently or in the future. So uh, and every year that goes by and every other problem that comes up, and government must do this, we must increase this. So it's just it's not sustainable, and it's becoming more and more unsustainable with each and every disaster that happens and each and every additional ask that we put to government. So uh, no, I don't think we should be looking at additional subsidies to small businesses. Um, there are things and there are solutions that we could probably close our refineries in the country, that sort of stuff. Those sort of things have problems. So we shouldn't. We're always looking at solving problems at the tail end, and not actually finding a solution to the causes of the problems. So I think it's a bit short-sighted, and you can do it with this problem, but you're gonna have to do it with another problem and another one. It just never comes to an end.
Okay. So the pandemic forced lots of businesses to look into or tap into different ways of expanding their businesses or scaling up in one way or another. And then e-commerce became the new buzzword, where people needed to go digital. They needed to be able to get people their products at a time where we were not really moving around. What has that meant for e-commerce in South Africa? Are we seeing bigger numbers? Are we seeing that space being something that more entrepreneurs should be looking to expand into and grow themselves in that sense?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's just accelerated adoption of technology and deepened it a lot more. And I think what, in some cases, were just temporary solutions during the pandemic, you know, even when the pandemic goes, you're like, okay, but why would we go back to the also a lot of office space is running below capacity,
Empty.
quite a lot.
Yeah.
So, which is a good thing, because what it does, it also um, it increases the availability of labor and doesn't localize it. It's fantastic also for just families and things, people being able, in a lot of cases, to work from home and be there when their children come from school, and not having to spend an hour, 2 hours a day in the traffic. So there's a lot, I think, that came out that we realized we don't have to do things in a particular way, and that's just one example, but it just accelerated what is inevitable. And with technology, the nature of it is that it accelerates at an accelerating pace, so you probably find that it will increase the adoption and the utilization of it, and more solutions and services that are offered through technology or supported by technology.
Let's talk maybe big business for a bit. We've seen a lot of company results in the past few months or so, with companies, big CEOs of mining groups, of retailers, talking about South Africa being a failed state, that the business conditions are not favorable, that they are struggling to upkeep profits with the costs of generators and that kind of thing. Is South Africa running the risk of losing big business names and business groups because we're not fixing things that we said on paper? We told rating agencies that we were on par, we're going to get our policies in place, and we're going to change things, we're going to grow our economy. But if big business is already threatening, saying that we are there's no seems to be no direction. Are we finding ourselves at risk of just losing more investment into the country?
Um, I think it will vary from what type of investment, and the business always follows opportunities, and even in the worst disasters, there are opportunities. So maybe you might swap one type of an investor for another. Uh, but I think the nature of our country, just the dynamics where we are geographically, and just the resources that the country has, the mineral wealth and everything else, is such that you are unlikely to see a total disinvestment net, that you will always have that. But as to what you don't want, it right now what we have is not sufficient to cater for the needs of the population. So you want that to increase, and you want to create an environment that attracts more and more. And there was a whole controversy about a trillion in is it a trillion in investments, etc. And you want to be focusing more on building than trying to just protect what is already there and stop it from leaving and swapping it for something else. So that is the challenge, that we're not creating an environment for that growth, and it's slowing down. And even if we do have some going out and some coming in an environment like that, the cost of what comes in under unfavorable circumstances tends to be higher, because then the risk is higher. So you've got to compensate them a bit more. Your interest rates will be higher, etc. Uh, so it's not great. We could certainly do better. We should be able to describe our economic strategy, and businesses need to have their elevator pitches. Um, our president should be able to give your economic strategy in an elevator pitch, and everybody else in government, and I should be able to say it, and you should be able to say it.
Yeah.
But if you ask me, what is our economic strategy? you know
I don't know. It's me, I don't know it.
so that's the challenge, and we need to have clarity on that. There's a quite a number of plans that we have, from the NDP. There's the infrastructure plans. There's this. There's the focus areas in terms of the sectors, the strategic sectors of the country, and there's a whole. But so there's a whole lot of parts, but as to where they're leading us, it's extremely unclear, and I think that is the biggest thing, that as a country, what we need from government, more than subsidies, more than support, is to just clarify what is our strategy. Where are we going as a country? What is going to drive our growth? um, where is the primary areas of investment? And you should be able to point to 3 or 4 things that are primary, that we are focusing on and that we're moving. So now, because of the energy transition, obviously energy is a big one, but it must be clear that that's not a growth. That's not an industry that drives growth.
Yeah.
We're replacing something that's already there
Yeah.
with
That's not
putting money.
working, and we're trying
Well,
to.
it's actually, but it could work, right?
Yeah.
But instead of fixing it, we're just moving to something else.
Yes.
So it can create a bit of a bump in economic activity, etc. But ultimately, it's going to the cost for the transition has been estimated at about 6 trillion rand, right? Um, that's the size of the GDP, and that we're gonna pay for it in about over a period of 30 years or so. So that's a subtraction of about 3% of GDP every year. And we are already at GDP levels 1% or low.
Yeah.
So that means that when we're done with this process, just this factor of transitioning is going to at least put us at baseline at about negative -2% of GDP. And so we need extra effort just to be at par.
Yeah.
And then if we want to grow the economy, then we need really superhuman effort. And without a very clear vision, without a very concise strategy, and one that is easily understandable to to even myself. You and I, we're just not gonna make it. So, if anything, that should be, and I don't think it's that difficult, because strategy is about choice ultimately. It's about also selecting what you're not going to focus on, what you're not going to do, and what we have now. And going back to the discussions um, around subsidies for small business, for energy, etc., is because we don't have a clear strategic direction. We try to be everything to everybody, and that's just a recipe for disaster, and that's part of the reason why we're here, and we just seem unable to solve the most, just the most basic of problems as a country.
So we're open for business, but we have a few little problems that we're working on. So we want to tell the world that we're open for business, but they must bear with us.
I mean,
That's what we're telling them.
even I mean, people can bear that, right? But you say, I'm a restaurant, I'm open for business, right? And then somebody says, well, can you can you build furniture for me? You say, yeah, of course. You try and build it. Okay, can you can you teach my children? Yes, we can. No, we're a restaurant. You can come to us for a meal, and that's about it. So we're open for business, but we've got to be clear about what's our business as a country, and that's not clear. And since mining sort of, as I suppose, has reduced its contribution to the economy relative to the size of the economy, because our economy was really built around mining and the supportive industries around it, right? And the beneficiation that comes from that. And in the absence of that, then you've got to be clear about what is the anchor that runs our economy. And we don't have that clarity, and consequently, we're open to business. So when we say, okay, we want to attract a trillion rand in investment, we've got to be clear about what investment we want and what investment we don't want, right? In what area and what type of investment we're willing to take, and we're willing to bend over backwards for this, but for that you can bring it, but you have to wait in line, that sort of thing. And if you have that clarity, you then attract the right people, the right investment. If you don't have the clarity, you discourage the right type of investment, and then you just encourage the crap that comes to you and ends up costing you rather than building you.
Hectic. Okay, Karabo, before we get to the tail end, or we are at the tail end of this conversation, I just wanted to get a sense from you if there were three nuggets that you would like to share with entrepreneurs in this period. What would you tell them to focus on? What kind of uplifting encouragement would you give them in this current economic climate? How do they scale up? What should they know if they don't know it already in order to survive the next 5 years?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think, we the country has a lot of problems, and entrepreneurship is really just about helping to solve problems and profiting from that. So look for the opportunities to provide solutions. And, one of the, with the increase in technology utilization and adoption, the ability to provide solutions that perhaps would not have been, would not, for an SMME, you would not be able to do it a few years ago. There's more, it's easier to deliver certain services. It's easier to utilize resources from across the country, from across the world, and get expertise from anywhere in the world. And so, yeah, and so I think it's just that don't get caught up in the negativity, in the sob stories around you, in your own sob story, let's try and just focus on the positive, on what we can do, and what opportunities does this provide us, and I think, again, technology makes it easier to collaborate, makes it easier to scale up quicker, because you don't have to lean on the resources in your own small environment. Um, if you are a small businesses in a far-flung town where nobody stays there, everybody's gone to Joburg, you can access those skills of the people that are in Joburg because of the internet, because of, so So some of the limitations that we're used to having, uh, we may not be able to see it, but some of them are no longer there, you know. And it's very important to really get to understand that, you know, there's things like even GPT. Uh, a lot of the answers that we would have been difficult for an entrepreneur to get can be easily retrieved from there. So, um, so it's not really just about having the right education, the right this. The information is there, and it can even be sourced and packaged for you by a computer in a way that is most useful to you. You know, it's not going to be 100% right all the time, but it's going to be useful enough for you to profit by it. And so to recognize that funding is available. And because of technology, again, it's not just funding that's inside the country. There are resources, you know,
Globally.
yeah. So to just understand that our capacity and capabilities have increased quite significantly. And so don't look at yourself and just the friends around you as the totality of your resources. Uh, you can think and attempt as big as you can imagine, really, in today's world. So, uh, but the main thing is, you know, where your head is, and if you're just focusing on that, on government is not doing anything for us, on then, um, yeah, then it's going to be even more difficult just to survive, let alone grow the business. Yeah.
100%, 100%. Karabo says it's not all gloom and gloom. He's saying that we can work together, we can collaborate, we can invest in technology, we can work with each other in order to scale up our businesses. And that's the end of our chat for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been the podcast series brought to you by Hikima Council.